So I'm Eric Marcus, and I make Making Gay History. And that is my grandmother, May Marcus. How many of you have ever come out to a grandparent? I came out to my grandmother 30 years ago, and that's what this story is about. So just a little background first on my grandmother. My grandmother, May Sperling, came to America in steerage in a rust bucket of a ship by way of Hamburg. She came from Warsaw, Poland. She traveled in steerage with her mother and 4 of her siblings. Her 4-year-old sister Pearl died on the trip here. My grandmother was put in quarantine for 6 weeks on Ellis Island because she had diphtheria. She's a classic immigrant. Her family arrived on Orchard Street on the Lower East Side. They hated it. They stayed for about 2 months and then they quickly moved to Brooklyn. And my grandmother loved telling stories about what life was like then. Actually, I shouldn't say she loves telling stories. She was really a classic immigrant. She pretended she was born here. She spoke perfect English if you don't consider a Brooklyn accent. Well, she had a very heavy Brooklyn accent, but she wouldn't have considered that an accent. So she loved to tell the stories when I asked her about what it was like living in that first apartment, and they had gas light, and you put a coin in a meter every time you wanted to get more gas for the light. So she grew up in a very, very different world than the one in which we live. And growing up with my grandmother, she always told me that when she came over and I was in the crib, standing in the crib, I always jumped up and down because I was so thrilled to see her. That never changed. I got out of the crib, but I still loved spending time with my grandmother. I had no sense of what my grandmother thought about gay people until I was 15 years old and my grandmother took me to Barney's on 7th Avenue and 17th Street in Manhattan, in Chelsea. It's a different Barney's then. It was sort of for aspirational middle-class people from Queens and Brooklyn. And Grandma was taking me to buy my first navy blazer. And we're in the young men's department, and this man in a blue jumpsuit comes flying out of the stock room, and he's got a zipper from his neck down to, as my grandmother would say, to his pupik. And so my grandmother was this tall, and she said, she motioned for me to come down and talk to her. And I put my ear next to her, and she said, "Fagula?" I thought, oh my God, this is not going to be good. So that's all I knew about what my grandmother thought of gay people, was at Barney's in 1974 or 73. So here's the scene. It's 1987. My first book is about to be published, The Male Couple's Guide. And everyone in my family knows that I'm gay, except my grandmother. And the reason, yes, you said, except Grandma. Now, why hadn't I come out to my grandmother yet? Because everyone in the family said it will kill her. It will destroy her image of you. You would never want to do that to your grandmother. And I honored my family's wishes up until that point, and I said, but I have a book that's being published, she'll find out. Now, my uncle was the patriarch of the family. My dad's dead. It was funny that my uncle would say that it would kill my grandmother because she had lost a sister on the ship to America. My father, her son, had killed himself. And the fact I was gay was going to kill her. She had lived through a lot already. So he said, why tell her? Who's ever going to know that you're gay? You know, you're doing a book about gay people. Who's going to know? So I said to him, I have to tell her. Because in case it came out, I wanted her to hear it from me first. The exact story of how I came out to her is a much longer story, so I'm going to save that for another event. Needless to say, it was a painful moment for her. I was terrified, but she said the most important thing. Even though I could see her eyes were filled with tears, she said, "You know that I love you." Now, I know from my uncle that she cried for 3 days after that. And I felt terrible about that, but then I felt it was my family's responsibility to take care of her. I wanted her to know that I was gay so that I would know that she loved me anyway. That was important to me. So the family dealt with her. So a few months later, my book is published. I go out on the road with the book. I'm on a show called CNN Newsnight Update at 2 in the morning. Who's going to see me on television at 2 in the morning? My aunt and uncle lived in Merrick, Long Island at the time. Thank God they're not here tonight, but I love my aunt and uncle. They lived in Merrick, Long Island. They had neighbors named Robin and Abe. Now, if you could imagine a Jewish American prince and princess to the extreme, that was Robin and Abe. Robin had hair that was like this with gold tips, her nails went out to here, and her husband had matching hair. So they're in bed, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, or 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm on a live show with Collins, and I'm going to check with Jordan every now and then how much time I have, because I have 5 minutes left, good. I'll talk even faster. So I'm on the show where there are live call-ins, and Robin is awake in bed flipping through the channels. Abe is asleep, and she catches me on CNN Newsnight Update just as someone who's called in says, I just want to tell your guest, he's saying this to the host, just want to tell your guest that he's a faggot. So Robin slaps Abe, I hear about this later, Abe, look who's on the television. So crack of dawn, next day, they're at my aunt and uncle's door. And my uncle says, hi, what are you doing here so early? We saw your nephew on the television last night. You didn't tell us he was gay. I was like, so, there's a lesson in that. I'll save the lesson for the end. My grandmother took me for a walk a few months later. It was Mother's Day, and she never took me for a walk before. And she said, I'd like to talk to you. So we went for a walk, and she said, now I understand that you're gay, and that's not going to change. Now, I should tell you, my grandmother was a thoroughly modern woman. She watched Dynasty, and she watched the Phil Donahue show. And so she said, I know it's not going to change, but why do you have to tell anyone? So I said, but Grandma, you know, some of us, people who can do this, people who can talk about being gay and are comfortable doing it, have a responsibility to tell their story. And for whatever reason, I'm good at telling my story, and it's important. And she accepted that. And the remarkable thing about my grandmother, who I adored, was that she grew over time. And she went on the road with me when I went to speak at schools. And I remember sitting with her in Pennsylvania. It was Lehigh University. And we were sitting with a group of students, and I heard her talking to a young man saying, you should tell your parents, they'll get used to it. And I just loved hearing her say that to him. My grandmother became a huge fan of mine. She came to all of my book signings, and I had lots of book signings for the different books I wrote. She died at 102. She would have told you, she would have said it was 2 years too long. Because she made it to her 100th birthday under her own steam. She embraced I should have worn my glasses. How many fingers is that? 3. She embraced my partner within a month of meeting him. She sent us a note saying, to my 2 grandsons. She came to our commitment ceremony, and not only did she come to the commitment ceremony, once she heard my mother was inviting all of her cousins, daughter-in-law, she invited all of her cousins, and nieces and nephews. So she was at the commitment ceremony. She couldn't have been more embracing. After she died, I cleaned out her apartment with my uncle and aunt. And my grandmother was, as I say, a modern woman. She did not collect things. She was not a hoarder. In her little TV room in Brooklyn, in Bensonhurst, she had a utility closet, and there was a shelf above the utility closet. She had 3 books. There was a Danielle Steele book, and I've forgotten who the other one was, and there was my book, Making Gay History. And I opened up the book, and there was the review of the book from the New York Times that she had saved all of those years. And I did what grandsons who've lost their grandmothers who love them very much do. I cried. She was someone who demonstrated to me and to lots of other people that if you give people a chance, they have the opportunity to grow. If I hadn't told my grandmother what I did, she would never have had that opportunity. And she discovered this whole world of people and became so comfortable that there was a wedding I was invited to, and I told her I'm going to this wedding, and she said, 2 boys or 2 girls? And I said, 1 boy, 1 girl. Oh, one of those. So if there's a lesson I hope you'll take away from this story, it is that we need to give the people in our lives the chance to change and grow. It was something my mother often said. And my grandmother, if she were here today, would say to you, don't miss the opportunity. Give your family a chance. They need to know, and you need to know that they know. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jordan.